أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين. أم حسب الذين يعملون السيئات أن يسبقونا ساء ما يحكمون. من كان يرجو لقاء الله فإن أجل الله لآت وهو السميع العليم. ومن جاهد فإنما يجاهد لنفسه إن الله لغني عن العالمين. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لندخلنهم لنكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولنجزينهم أحسن الذي كانوا يعملون. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لنكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولنجزينهم أحسن الذي كانوا يعملون. ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حسنا وإن جاهداك لتشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما إلي مرجعكم فأنبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لندخلنهم في الصالحين. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله فإذا أوذي في الله جعل فتنة الناس كعذاب الله ولئن جاء نصر من ربك ليقولن إنا كنا معكم أوليس الله بأعلم بما في صدور العالمين. وليعلمن الله الذين آمنوا وليعلمن المنافقين. وقال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا اتبعوا سبيلنا ولنحمل خطاياكم وما هم بحاملين من خطاياهم من شيء إنهم لكاذبون ولا يحملن أثقالهم وأثقالا مع أثقالهم وليسألن يوم القيامة عما كانوا يفترون وليسألن يوم القيامة عما كانوا يفترون.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak, and a special thanks to all of you who are joining us tonight, especially during these holy nights in support of justice. My name is Lina Al-Arian. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. As Dr. Asim mentioned, our mission is to defend civil liberties and freedoms, promote a fair US criminal justice system, and advocate for the rights of political prisoners targeted in the war on terror. These are victims of politically motivated prosecutions who were targeted based on their faith, activism, charity, or speech, or in unfair sting operations due to other vulnerabilities. CCF advocates for these prisoners through 6 program areas: education and outreach, grassroots advocacy, legal support for prisoners, prisoner and family support, research and tracking, and legislative advocacy. On this side of the pond, the Coalition is the only organization in direct and regular contact with these victims of government overreach. We strive to serve both prisoners and their impacted family members who are left struggling with the ongoing trauma of their loved ones' imprisonment. And we work to turn the victimization of these families into empowerment. This hands-on work with both groups is the heartbeat of our organization. Like Cage, CCF emerged from the firsthand experience of its founder, who for many years battled for his freedom against the grossly inhumane US criminal justice system. It is indeed impossible to separate the work and mission of CCF from this context, since the focus of our work will always be guided and led by those who are directly affected, who fully understand the trauma and indignities of surveillance, incarceration, and prosecution, let alone a wholly manufactured prosecution, who realize that the trauma of such an experience will forever alter one's notions of freedom and justice, and even one's sense of brotherhood, community, and citizenship. And even 17 years or a half a lifetime later, in my case, this trauma will still trigger anxiety, PTSD, and stress dreams involving a furtive stranger outside looking in. Many of you who are present for this webinar are here to listen to the extraordinary story of my father, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, whose case was one of the earliest political prosecutions in the post-9/11 era. But what you may not realize is that our story and our family's experience with what might now be called institutional Islamophobia began a full decade before his arrest. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, where my father was a professor and anti-war activist working on constitutional rights and Palestinian liberation. I remember what it felt like at just 10 years old to come home to a house that was turned upside down after every inch of it was raided by the FBI. I remember the anxiety I felt hearing footsteps of agents sneaking around our backyard for illegal searches and seizures. But more bizarrely, I now remember the conversations I had at that age, since I was forced to relive and listen to many of them years later, stored in boxes and boxes full of recorded phone calls in preparation for my father's 6-month-long trial. Ironically, while he was being surveilled and the target of a malicious investigation and relentless smear campaign in the local paper, my father was simultaneously invited to lobby regularly on Capitol Hill as one of few Muslim activists with influence in Washington. He was also a leader of the Tampa Muslim community and had founded the school and mosque we all attended. He campaigned against the unconstitutional use of secret evidence that was used to detain Arabs and Muslims in the 90s, most notably my beloved uncle, Dr. Mazen al-Najjar, another Palestinian intellectual who worked at a think tank my father founded at his university, which sought to bridge the gap between the Muslim world and the West. My uncle was unjustly imprisoned for 5.5 years until his deportation a few short months before my father's arrest, or as we call it, Volume 2, or the sequel. During my uncle's case, it was shocking to many people that the government could detain someone indefinitely and without charging them with any crime while insisting that any alleged evidence they had was a national secret, so that no one, not the individual, not the judge, not a jury, could ever see it. In a major effort to free my uncle and those like him, my parents launched a national campaign to end the use of secret evidence. For his efforts, Newsweek magazine declared my father at the time the premier civil rights activist in the country. After working to get a bipartisan bill introduced, receive hundreds of sponsors, and nearly signed into law, the right-wing and pro-Israel forces in the US aggressively targeted my father to ensure that no Palestinian and no Muslim could ever carry political influence in this country or be seen as anything other than a national security threat. Not long after, the FBI raided our home once more in the early morning hours, but this time they arrested my father and vowed he'd never emerge as a free man. That day, Attorney General John Ashcroft delivered a nationally televised press conference declaring him a terrorist. My father would spend the next several years in prison, 4 of them in solitary confinement. Our community was gripped by fear and wanted nothing to do with my family. My mother was told she was no longer welcome at the mosque, but after 12 years, an $80 million trial with no guilty verdicts, hordes of attorneys, 2 legal cases, the government was forced to drop the charges because they had no evidence. My father came to this country at age 17 as a stateless Palestinian refugee and built a life here. He was denied US citizenship because of his political activism, but it was the only place he called home. After his release, he was deported to Turkey and banned from US soil, exiled to a country he had never visited, where he had no family and couldn't speak the language. Despite the injustice that happened to him, he managed to rebuild his life and resume his intellectual pursuits that seek to address the challenges in Muslim societies by founding the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at the Istanbul Sabah ad-Din Zaim University. I've been very proud to follow the high-quality scholarly research, journals, conferences, and webinar series the center has consistently produced. A loss for all of us in the United States, but most certainly a gain for the greater Muslim world. But I always think that it's a bit sad and ironic that my father's case, the arrest, the enormous financial strain, the alienation from the Muslim community, the torturous prison conditions, the media onslaught, the vindictiveness of rogue prosecutors and FBI agents, the debilitating hunger strikes, which I should add, struck untold fear in the hearts of his family members, the exile and the permanent separation from his children and now his grandchildren, all of this, and it is still considered a victory and a success story. As I dedicate my life to this mission and justice work, I'm deeply, excruciatingly aware that my family is one of the luckier ones. The case of Sami al-Arian is still considered a best case scenario for politically motivated charges of terrorism. There are many others, like the founders of the largest Muslim charity in the US, the Holy Land Five, who are currently serving life sentences on similar charges. Still, the knowledge you gain from an experience like my family's, from recognizing the power of a narrative and the media's ability to demonize an innocent person and instill fear in the public. A professor once asked me in front of my entire class if I was the daughter of the notorious Sami al-Arian, to being at the mercy of prison officials who may deny your loved one languishing in solitary confinement, visitation, or phone calls for months, because according to them, it's a privilege, not a right. The sleepless nights, or the permanent sinking feeling in your stomach from not knowing how long this test will last, compounded by the crippling isolation from those who look at you in pity and turn away. This knowledge that you gain becomes a burden you carry. And it's why the coalition that my father conceived of while housed in a 6x8 solitary cell carries out unique programs such as sending canteen money to prisoners and gathering impacted family members in a conference, giving them a voice and working to empower them to reclaim our narrative. While we are proud of the advocacy work we do both on Capitol Hill and in the courtroom, we recognize the value and deep meaning these seemingly small efforts hold for those also burdened with that knowledge. This evening, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude to CAGE for long shouldering this responsibility and for being one of the most principled and courageous organizations advocating for our most vulnerable. I hope that all of you tuning in will generously contribute to sustain their critical work. To quote our dear sister Afia Siddiqui, serving a horrific 86-year sentence, her unjust imprisonment is not simply her test, it is the test of the entire Ummah. And it is with great honor that I now welcome my father to share his story. Thank you again, Brother Asim, Brother Muazzam, for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here with you in partnership. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Lena. That was, I think I speak for everyone when I say that. I think we need to do a separate seminar just with you to learn from you and to learn more about your perspective on these things, because I think it is crucial for all of us. So, Jazakallah khair. And tonight, inshallah, I'll actually be co-hosting this evening with our dear brother Muazzam Beg. We'll be asking Dr. Sami a series of questions, asking him to respond to them. Brother, I'll be going first, asking a series of 3 questions. We'll then break for a fundraising period of about 15 minutes, inshallah. And after that, we'll move on to a section with Brother Muazzam, where he'll enter into a conversation with Dr. Sami more about prisoner experiences, bi'idhnillah. So Dr. Sami, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, I guess my first question is really about, where does this all really begin? Because of course it's not with 9/11.
No, it didn't. Actually, the early beginnings were, I would say, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I was tracing this, and it started with pro-Israeli groups. There are several foundations and organizations that existed right around 1990, 91. They started producing books and reports. They allied themselves with some Republicans in Congress. I was monitoring them at the time. It was used to call the Republican Task Force on Terrorism. And actually, I visited the congressman who housed it, and he was the chairman of it. And he was an extremely Islamophobic guy because he was from Florida, from Orlando. And then they started expanding more and more. And then they allied themselves with some in the law enforcement agencies, particularly the FBI. And they started conceiving of a law where they can monitor Muslims. But this didn't take shape but until the first World Trade Center bombing that took place in 1993. And I think this is when this whole thing started. And during my incarceration, I also found out that that's when they started also, at least that's what they acknowledged, full surveillance of myself. They thought that I had access to about 18 lines of telephone, 18 telephone lines, and they were monitoring each and every one of them. In 10 years, between 1993 and 2003, when I was arrested, they had a collection of about 471,000 phone calls and faxes and communications. So that tells you that there was a whole focus on the Muslim community at the time. It wasn't just me, but of course I was among the first. In 1995, they passed laws. 1996, it was introduced in 95, passed in 96, and that's when we started taking notice. Part of it was to use secret evidence, but it was so outrageous in the mindset of Americans. They were just applying this in immigration context. And the first 29 victims between April 96 and April 98, because we were monitoring each and every one of them, 28 were Muslims, particularly Arabs, Palestinians, Iraqis at the time. So we knew that we were the targets. So that's when we started mobilizing. And of course, unfortunately, one of the victims was, as Lena said, one of my best friends, lifelong friends, and colleague, and also my brother-in-law, Mazen Najjar. He was among the victims. And of course, they tried, when they arrest these people, try to intimidate, try to get them to work for them, become informers, and so on and so forth, because they would have other targets in mind.
that. I mean, I think this is important for us to realize, because this was the emphasis really for a lot of your work for so long. Trying to get justice for this one person, really, who of course you have a very close connection to, but I think you understood the implications for the wider Muslim community.
It wasn't just him. I mean, as I said, it was, we started working on this before he even was. In '95, we went to Michigan, I believe, and we had one of the premier constitutional scholars, invited him to brief us on this pending law. And he said it's going to be devastating to civil liberties. And his view was that this is going to start with you guys, because always U.S. Policy starts with minorities where people do not have defense, and then they move into the larger society. And that's what happened, of course, with the Patriot Act and others. So we knew about this before even my brother-in-law was incarcerated. And of course, once he was, obviously we needed to mobilize, and we did. And we started by initiating 3 different efforts and campaigns and 2 organizations, one local and one national. And the national organization used to be called National Coalition to Protect Political Freedoms. Now this one is civil freedoms, because we even lost that. But that one, we started with 40, 40 organizations. Many of them, actually the majority of them were non-Muslim. Some of the Irish ones, because they were targeted too, even though they had all kinds of freedoms after the Good Friday Accord. But before that, remember, the Good Friday Accord happened a year after we were founded, and they were part and parcel of the organization when we started, because they were using secret evidence against them too, because of the close connection with the UK government on the IRA and others. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, this thing has broader meanings. They start with minorities, and then they expand to the whole population after it becomes normative.
So, what's obviously fascinating, well, I'm actually sorry, I said obviously, but what many people don't know about your case is that this campaigning led to strange bedfellows, should we say, as you went on. And, I don't want to give too much of the story away by saying what the end result was, but, you ended up very close to Republicans, of all people, the very people who'd come into power. So could you tell us a bit about how that happened?
Yeah, right. Well, you see, when we started in '97, when we established the National Coalition, the NCPCF, and we knew that we have really a long road ahead, and this is to be, slow climbing, and it's going to be a lot of hard work. But we knew what the steps were. The first step, usually, in any campaign to reach success, especially when you're trying to change the law and change how people perceive it, you start public campaign, education campaign. And we started that in '97 and '98, dozens of lectures around the country, all Muslim conferences. They would be very reluctant to touch it, but we will force ourselves and have some kind of a session or 2, bring prominent people. So I had, we had to establish all kinds of connections, especially at that time with former congressmen, because no congressman would actually touch us. After that, we started with the media. So we visited all kinds of editorial boards across the country. I think within 2 years, we produced at least 50 editorials against secret evidence. And at the third campaign, after media, we had also 200 featured stories on the families of secret evidence victims. The third campaign was a political one. That's when you reach, after you win politically, or at least have some kind of acceptance within the political establishment, that's when the legal side and the courts will start listening and ruling in your favor. So the third stage was politics. How do we get into that? And Muslims do have some close congressmen, especially in areas where there are majority of Muslims, or at least donors. And in my case, when I looked, I found out that there was this particular gentleman. He was very much high rank within the Democratic Party. Democrats were a minority in Congress at the time, but he was the second ranking. So I went and visited him. His name is David Bonnier. He immediately got, he's civil libertarian also. He immediately got what I was talking about and immediately joined the cause. And he said, "What can I do for you?" Actually, I was taken aback because I wasn't expecting him to immediately embrace us. So we told him we need to have legislation to ban secret evidence. So to make the long story short, we started a campaign. I brought some Republicans also, some constitutional scholars, and we got some members of our community introducing me to other people. So slowly but surely, we started this campaign. We got the ACLU We got other National Lawyers Guild and other civil liberties organizations. We drafted the law. We got it through 4 Congress people, and it's a fascinating story, but it's very detailed, so I'm not gonna bore you with that. But at the end of the campaign, from, I'd say, politically, from October 98 until about January 2000, about a year and 3 months, we were able to get over 100 congressmen, and by September, 129 Congress people who signed to this legislation, including the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who was very difficult. His name was Henry Hyde, very, very prominent Republican. But I got to him, he was from Chicago, from our community members there, because they were donating to his campaign. So you have to know how to talk to these people and get them in. I brought him to Tampa, that's where we were, and he was astonished because he saw in a meeting of several hundred people, there were so many non-Muslims, bishops and pastors and all kinds of prominent people. So that got his attention. And of course, we raised money for him as well. So by the summer of 2000, we had a hearing. It was in our favor, really. And then we had a markup, meaning they voted in the Judiciary Committee 26-2 in our favor, which was an absolute shock to many. Because most organizations, you know, Muslim organizations, they didn't think, they were calling this a losing issue. We're not going to waste our time on this losing issue. But remember, this was a presidential campaign, a presidential year, presidential election year, which meant, and there was no incumbent. It was Gore and George W. Bush. And I had, you know, people on both campaigns, talking with them constantly, if they're gonna sign with us on this issue, if they can promote it like we did, because I had difficulty with Republicans in Congress. By October, and you know, as I said, I was talking to both campaigns, it became very clear that this is a very tight race. So I get a call in October of 2000 from a very prominent Republican, actually, very close to Karl Rove. And he asked me, it was at night, what would it take for the Muslim community to endorse George W. Bush? He wanted just that extra 0.5% or 1% where they can make a difference. And I said, it's very, you know, easy. Grover, his name was. It's very easy. Well, what you have to do is have him support the banning of secret evidence and say something against it and support our legislation in Congress. And he was part of this campaign, that friend of mine who was introducing me to different Republicans. And the next day, something happened that I wasn't expecting at all. It was a second debate, and the format was, it was the Jim Lehrer, who was the moderator, Bush and Gore. He asked Gore a question regarding racial profiling, which is used against African Americans. And of course, Gore denounced it. Then he turned to George W. Bush to get his reaction about racial profiling. So he pivoted immediately to secret evidence. He said, yeah, this is wrong, but there's another form of racial profiling. He made it like that. And it's called secret evidence. And this is wrong, and it's un-American, must stop. And this is used against Arabs and Muslim Americans. And there is legislation in Congress by Spencer Abraham that must pass. I was frankly shocked. You know, 62 million Americans just heard the campaign that I've been working on now for years. And, you know, half an hour later, after it ended, I get a call from this guy and said, I delivered. Are you going to deliver now? I said, of course, you know, you did deliver. Let me see what I can do. So we gathered all the Muslim leaders, all the major organizations, and we decided that evening to endorse George W. Bush based simply on this promise of ending, but for a reason. Because we thought, and I think it was a sound thinking, that communities, especially minorities, they don't become empowered until they win their civil rights battle. And this was our civil rights battle. If they could use secret evidence against us, we will never be able to rise again. So we had to stop this and then move forward. Since he was willing to do that, we're going to forget all other sins. We're not going to talk about Palestine or Iraq or any other thing. You know, we were not naive or oblivious to the fact where Republicans stood on many issues of concern to the Muslims and to the minorities there. But we were very much focused on this. And we thought if we win this, we can get access to others. Now, of course, no one knew the future, what's going to happen in the future. But anyway, so we started and we endorsed him the following Monday. We identified 6 states in which we can make a difference. One of them was Florida, and it was my responsibility. So we went there full force. We mobilized the Muslim community there. Usually Muslims vote 3-1 Democrats. That year it was reversed. About 74% of Muslims in Florida voted for Bush, and he won Florida by 537 votes, which means that our vote certainly made a difference. And by winning Florida, he won the presidency. And it took months, if you remember, before it was actually certified. And actually, on the eve of his inauguration, I was invited to attend his inauguration, and I was thanked in a private celebration by 3 prominent Republicans. One of them was Newt Gingrich, his former Speaker of the House. Another was the head of the Congressional Republican Committee, Tom Davis. And the third was John Sununu, who was also the chief of staff of the early President Bush. And we started asking now that you need to deliver on secret evidence. And they said, we're working on it. And by August, we started the campaign again in Congress. We had over 100 sponsors, co-sponsors. And they called me in August and said, okay, we're ready now to end secret evidence. So this is your best day that you've been waiting for. You need to get us all the Muslim leaders around the country. I called everybody. Everybody went to Washington. Unfortunately, that day was 9/11.
Yeah, Rob, seriously, on the day that we're going to end secret evidence, it ends up being the day that really cements it.
Yeah, I mean, no, we went from secret evidence to no evidence. I mean,
to no evidence, right?
Yeah, it wasn't manufactured evidence. Yeah.
Right, absolutely, subhanallah, subhanallah. And I guess this moment, of course, 9/11, while we don't treat it in the way that, say, a lot of people who take a Western or Eurocentric view take it, which is like, this is an exceptional moment in history, because of course we know that all manner of atrocities take place every single day throughout the world. I guess in some ways, America had never really been attacked on its own soil in this way. And so, of course, you have this moment where a lot of legislation is being rushed through. I guess my last question to you is kind of around the environment and the feeling that was prevalent in the US leading up to your arrest. Can you give us a sense for how the community, felt and how it responded to this moment?
I was running university. I was a professor at university running a school, Muslim school. It was one of the saddest, most difficult days in our lives. Suddenly something happened, Muslims, and it's not just this organization or that individual. All Muslims around the world became suspects. We immediately, our school is a dead end street. We had something like 12, 14 acres. And suddenly we have every single TV station and news reporter on our soil. All the children are terrified of what's going on. And we became suspects. And of course, for the next 2 weeks, I was just going from one place to another, on TV, on different community organizations, trying to talk about this and try to dispel this myth. And I think we were making some progress, because a lot of people were pushing back those who would like to, with broad brush, indict the Muslims. And then something happened in which because I was also a target way before this by pro-Zionist groups. They were trying to get me fired from the university years before, starting in '94 actually. And I was suspended, in fact, from teaching, and an investigation was launched. For 2 years at the university, when they came back and said he did absolutely nothing wrong, and I was reinstated. So they were after me. But by that time, we had a different university president. She was also Zionist. Her family has its own foundation in Israel. And she was trying to find the pretext to terminate me. And to terminate a professor in the US is extremely difficult. It's not something easy if you're tenured. And they took that opportunity, because I was on one of these programs. It was a setup, and I was careless, to tell you the truth, because I wanted to get our message out, and I didn't investigate the host because I didn't have Fox on my channel at the time as my channel list. So I wasn't familiar with this guy, O'Reilly. So when I appeared, and as was a setup, I was ambushed. Couldn't get much into that interview, and it was used to basically suspend me. And then she took the opportunity to try to fire me. So that case became the most important academic freedom issue since Angela Davis in the 1960s. So not only you're fighting Islamophobia and Islamophobes and all these kind of things, you're trying to save your reputation and your career, which became, even doubly more difficult. And then because it became a national issue, then, other programs of national reputation became taking interest in my case and being watched by the millions. And it was, all of it were pretty much distortions, and you can't lose. The US has these very liberal laws when it comes to libel, because if you're a public person, then anything is open. You can't sue people. You really have to prove that they had certain intention. It takes years to do that with millions of dollars, which I don't have. So my reputation was taking a hit. I was everywhere, but we were fighting back. So we had good editorials and columns from even Washington Post and New York Times at the time. So the Zionists were not happy with this. So they started pushing the government more, especially the university president, because now she is facing sanctions from the most prominent academic organization in the country because of the way she treated me. And they gave her a deadline. Unless I'm reinstated, they are going to censure the university. And that would have been a big deal, because that means many prominent professors wouldn't come, student societies cannot function, and so on and so forth. So felt she can't do anything. So she went running to the government, asking them to do something. And this is something that is unprecedented. When a US attorney would announce the impaneling of a grand jury, usually all these things happen in secret. That happened in February, because the warning came to the university that they need to reinstate me by August. So August came, nothing happened. So she sends my lawyer a proposal to pay me $1 million and resign. So I ask, all right, give it to me in writing, I'll consider it. But the chairman of that university, the chairman of the board, wouldn't do it. So I've been calling this guy a terrorist. Now he's telling me, give him $1 million. That's over my dead body. She said, I can't do anything. He said, okay, just let me handle it. So he went to Jeb Bush, who was the brother of the president, and he was also the governor of Florida, and he is the one who appointed this guy. He was a very wealthy Republican. So they said, okay, just delay what you can so you don't get censured. We'll see what we could do. And I could see this unfolding when I was privy to my discovery, trying to find out, what information they could use. And I could see how this thing started. The grand jury started meeting. Usually they meet 1 or 2 days a month. These people were meeting daily and fed all kinds of lies and fabrications and nonsense. But of course, it's one side. So so they go and sue me to fire me, asking the courts to fire me, which is nonsensical in the US court system. But it takes about 4 months. So they lose in state court, they take it to federal court, they lose in federal court, but they bought themselves 4 months before they get censured. 2 months later, I was arrested based on this bloated, which I never thought that it'd come to that. I thought they may, cook up something has to do with immigration or something. But I found out that they investigated every aspect of my life. When I said that, everything, every single penny I ever earned or spent since '87, they had accounting for it. They went through anything that I ever owned and to see if there is any fraud, my taxes. Actually, I found out that they went to my accountant, and under secrecy, the accountant will give me every year, my taxes, and with the same day, he would be forwarding them my own taxes so they can go investigate to see if they can get something on me. And I found because this is against the law. If the FBI wanted to go to IRS, it's by law, they cannot get it. So they were getting it from actually my accountant, who was giving me hints, but I was naive. He retired and I said, why did you go find someone else? And he said, no, I like you. and there you go. He was doing my taxes and giving a copy to the government. So, there are stories and stories to say this. Lena mentioned, when they raided our houses twice, and they took everything that they could carry, including also in our center, that I had center research that she mentioned. It was called World and Islam Studies Enterprise. And they took everything, which compelled us to have to close it. They froze its accounts and so on and so forth. It's just one way to shut people up when they don't have anything. But once they have these people and they needed to bail out this, this president, So I think what happened is that the brother of the president went to the White House because we have these records, and he asked him to do something. That's when the grand jury start meeting almost on a daily basis, and they reached this bloated indictment.
Yeah, Dr. Sami, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Great to see you, brother.
Of course, I've seen you before, and the last time was a couple of weeks ago in this almost a similar format. We got a taste about your life, but we never really got the depth of the detail, and I certainly never got to ask the questions that I wanted. I've heard about you from my colleagues who've met you, and I've heard about you before through the work of CCF and also reading about your case. Tell me first, before anything, you said last time that this is the first time that you'd spoken about this case in any great detail outside. Can you tell me what is it that prompted you to do that?
Well, of course, your organization is unique, and therefore I feel very comfortable sharing my experiences with the members of the organization. That's one thing. But the other thing is, most venues that I was invited to, no one asked me actually to talk about my experience. It's not like I was asked and I declined. It's just, it never happened. I mean, if it happens just in passing, you know. I'll be talking about all kinds of issues, even sometimes what happens in terms of Islamophobia within the US, but not directly about my experience. I would be asked maybe individually, privately, about, you know, certain aspects, but I don't think I ever made a speech just simply on my experience and lessons learned or something like that.
So it's a double honor then for us, and it's also an exclusive, unique thing for us. Something that Lena was talking about was the effects of the family, or on the family rather, of your detention. Can you just explain to me the first days, because I want to see if there's any parallels from either myself or with other prisoners that we've come across, and I'm sure there are, of what it was like that when you were first taken, your house was raided and you were taken, you were arrested and you were kept in. Tell me a little bit about that process and what the first few days were, because I think the first few days are always the most crucial and the most difficult.
Well, because of the drumming up of the media and other parties, I expected something was going to happen. We were in January, the university lost its cases. Now I'm suing them, and it was the whole atmosphere was electric, you know. But I never expected what happened, what came, you know, with this massive indictment, dozens and dozens of agents, and with this, you know, they took me, and I have all the, you know, the whole media of the world was there. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was Fajr time when I was arrested. It's interesting because the arresting agent, you know, he came and whispered in my ears. He took me aside and handcuffed me and said, "You are charged with," and he wouldn't even say it. He would spell it. And he said it like, you know, taking like 5 seconds saying the word terrorism, like he's celebrating. And then TV cameras, you know, when this was happening, 5 o'clock in the morning. How the hell did they know about it? He said, or they listened to our, of course, he called them in. It was staged. And then he would drive me past the mosque, and he said, "You will never see this mosque ever again," you know, trying to break me down. And it's interesting because 2 weeks before I came to Turkey, I asked for permission. When Turkey asked for me, they relaxed the rules, and I was able to go to Tampa and give a khutbah in that mosque. And I told him at the time that I was told that I would never see this mosque again, and it was full. You know, we had, you know, anyway. So,
yeah. So tell me that what was going through your mind when they took you first into a police cell and started to interrogate you, and then, you know, did you get the sense that they really want to put me away for a long time? Is that
of course, you know that, you know, because I understand the American system very well. I understand how they work. And I knew that I would never talk with them. They took me, of course, and once you tell them I want my lawyer, they stop talking to you. So that's the first thing I said. I need my lawyer. So they stopped talking to me and said, "Can we talk about Iraq?" Because the Iraq invasion was pending. So we started talking politics. But yeah, I was taken there, you know, and you know, I didn't realize that John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, was actually the one who announced the indictment and all that. So I was totally isolated for a month. And of course, I started my hunger strike immediately. But that was the first, you know, I went through 3 different hunger strikes. The first one lasted over 100 days, but that was, you know, the first 30 days was without liquids. And then after that, I was taking liquids, you know, basically like on a diet or something. So they didn't consider that as a real hunger strike. I only suspended it after I fired all my lawyers that they were appointed and started representing myself until I was able to afford one. I went through another hunger strike, you know, years later. That was very painful. That was for 60 days. And that was with water.
Did they try to force feed you there? Do they have a process of force
Well, after 22 years, I passed out and I hit my head on the sink. I was trying to make wudu. They took me to the hospital, and then they took me to a prison hospital. I was federal prison, and I was under monitor 24 hours. And every day they were threatening me to force feed me. And of course, I lost over 55 pounds at the time. And then I suspended it after 60 days because, you know, the political message that I wanted was received. Then I went through another, a year later, another one for 55 days, where the first 18 days was without water. And there was a reason for this, because I was asked to go to a grand jury because it was this second case. It wasn't about the first, you know, even after I beat them the first time and we won our case, they had another case. So these 2 hunger strikes were because of that other case, not because of the original one. But my family, this is the most painful thing. You know, whenever you think about it, you know, you see how much they had to suffer. And, you know, my son heard about it actually from TV, and because both of them, one was in London. My son actually was in London. My daughter was in DC, and they have to watch from the TV. My other members of the family, they were terrified when they came to the house. They couldn't leave the house. They couldn't do anything. And they had to stay the full day while they were searching every aspect of our house. And then they had to endure not only the fear and terror of that moment, but also the rejection or the look that they would get from the same, unfortunately, school and mosque and this, because people were terrified. You know, I'm not blaming anybody. I think the FBI did pretty good in trying to intimidate every member of our community. Everybody had a visit. Everybody was sort of threatened, and they felt unwelcome. And it took years for that to repair. You know, eventually my wife had to take my children out of that school because they felt alienated, and that, of course, affected them tremendously.
I mean,
this is the type of things we try to save other families from.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've had, of course, here in the UK. There have been many arrests in different cases, and even with the Guantanamo prisoners, including my own family in the beginning, that there was a sense of fear from the community. But after a certain time, they started to come together and build and get support, actually, from a lot of non-Muslims, which we have to accept.
Yes. Yes.
What I wanted to ask you is that when you were in prison, of course, the concept in countries like Britain, America, and Australia, and so forth, is that they don't have something called political prisoners. Perhaps they have them in the Arab countries, but political prisoners, they say that we don't have such a thing. Now, when you were in prison, in the various prisons that you were in, did the other inmates see you as a political prisoner, or did they see you as how the government had tried to paint you, he's a sponsor of terrorism and so forth? How would other people look at you? You're a professor, you're an imam, you're an activist, you've been recognized alongside people like Malcolm X and Martin and Muhammad Ali as a dissident. How did they see you?
As I said, I was in 2 different phases. The first phase was actually in prison. That stayed for about 2,020 days. And then I was under house arrest for about 5.5 years. The first 2,020 days, I was only in the general population for 75 days. During these 75 days, which after the 75 days, they started the second case. That's why it was disrupted. I was a celebrity actually in the prison ground. They called me professor, and everybody was celebrating me because I beat the government. And to them, beating the government is the highest rank you can ever achieve, as a prisoner. And I had double protection. In prison life in the US, you must have protection. You have to belong to a group, otherwise anybody can beat you up, or anybody can really walk all over you. So I had the protection of the Muslims, and I felt that the first day. A group of them came. We're the Muslim community here. You're under our protection. Here's your toothpaste, and here's your toothbrush, and here's this, and here's that. And I also, the guy who was next to me was from Sicily. You know, he's an American, but he was Italian descent. He was also the holder of the boxing silver medal in the 1968 Olympics. You know, very tough guy. And his relationship with the mafias. So I became his friend. So I was protected by the mafias too.
Double protection.
No, double protection. So no one can actually touch me. And these days, you know, I felt what it means to be a prisoner. I mean, federal prison has good ways, and of course, if you're a target, it could be very, very difficult. But yes, on these 75 days, I was basically very much celebrated, and
as far as the system, you know, you're a high-profile prisoner. This is happening in and around what, 2005, 2006? Is that right?
This story was in 2006. Yes.
2006, yeah. So by this time, the war in Iraq has happened. Afghanistan has already happened. Guantanamo is set up. The whole process of the war on terror is in full swing, and that's one of the reasons why you're actually being targeted. So I wanted to ask you, to what degree were you aware about Guantanamo, about secret evidence used to hold people, and the fact that there were also mass hunger strikes taking place there?
I was very much aware because my family had subscription for the New York Times. I was reading the New York Times every single day, every single part of it. So I was very much aware of it. And also I had another publication that comes from London, Al-Quds Al-Arabi at the time in Arabic. Yeah. So we had that. So with these two, and then of course you had your transistor radio. You know, I always would listen to Democracy Now! And others, and I would get full reports. You know, I was very much aware of what's going on outside.
Yeah. And were you aware also then, because one of the things that happened with us is that they had American soldiers who were reservists who'd actually were working as prison guards on, sometimes we had people who worked on death row who would come along then and use their methods on us. Were you aware of, I guess the question really is that, was there a sense of Islamophobia amongst some of the prison officers or the prison system, or were they kind of equally treating everybody?
Well, many of the prison guards in the U.S. are veterans of U.S. wars. So a lot of people, yes, they were in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we will have discussions. And of course, at the beginning, they were so suspicious of me. I was very much, I was badly treated, you know, unlike other prisoners, you know, and criminals. So for example, for about, I think, close to 9 weeks, I was, you know, whenever I meet with my attorney, they wouldn't carry my stuff. And because when they transfer you, you have to be handcuffed from the back. I couldn't carry my stuff. So I would put it on my back and I would be walking, you know, hunched over like this for about a mile, which was crazy, you know, 9 weeks like that, because they wouldn't carry my stuff, and they hated me. But after a while, they started to know me more, and they started having, you know, basically respect. And they understood that what they have been told, it was a bunch of lies, and that's not who we were. But at the same time, there are rules that they can't violate.
I mean, what you're saying is just, you know, you just sent a shiver down my spine, because you know how they used to transport us? The way they transported us as prisoners, they used to tie our hands behind our back, and they used to put us into the ruku' position and make us with a soldier with pushing on one way and another soldier pushing it the other way. And you had to walk like that. And those very same soldiers who in the beginning treated us like that, some of those soldiers have actually come to the UK and visited me as friends after seeking forgiveness. Can you imagine? So I was going to ask you, were there any instances between you and people, either interrogators or guards, where they actually realized what had been done was a great injustice?
Well, first of all, no interrogations, because in oil, if you say my lawyer, they stopped interrogation and they can't force you.
Sure.
But of course they were taping, you know, so whatever, but didn't make a difference. But in terms of treatment, some of them were nice, decent people, and others were monsters. You know, at one point I remember I went through 14 different prisons in the US. Some of them were very, very harsh. You know, others were reasonable in terms of, you know, but prison life is prison life. But in one instance, particularly, I had this very abusive prison guard who started, you know, doing all kinds of stuff, abusing me, tightening the chains around my hand, pushing me, hitting me through the wall, and so on and so forth. So I complained one time to the judge, and he asked me that I must have information. So I did, the second time he did it, I gave him the information, but nothing happened. So we made a complaint to the Justice Department, and usually it goes to an independent ombudsman within the Justice Department. And but because so many people, I mean, this is the other thing about how you campaign. One thing that was different in my case than the others is the amount of publicity and campaign we were able to engender. So we had thousands of people asking the Justice Department why you are not investigating this incident, which eventually they did. And they came to me and said, we usually investigate 1 out of 10,000 cases, and yours is one of them. So describe to us what happened to you. To make a long story short, when I identified these guards, they went and they talked to them and they said, it's your word against them. They deny it. The only way, they were so sure that I wouldn't agree to it. The only way we can continue this investigation if you agree to take a lie detector test. So my lawyer was reluctant. I said immediately I would take one, no problem. So they gave me one. And after the end, you know, he told my lawyer that he passes with flying colors. So they went and they gave him to the other guys and they flunked. So I don't know what happened to them, but that was one way how they, you know, they said that they have been punished. I don't know what kind of punishment they were given, but it wasn't the way, because outside the US, basically there are no rules except whatever they make the rules to be. So I was calling my incarceration, you know, Guantanamo minus, because we had a little bit more than what you guys had at the time. But, you know, when I went, one of the shockest moments for me was when I went from county jail, even though it was my first experience with prison, so it was horrifying, but it was nothing compared to federal prison, where you're in solitary, you're denied almost everything. You get only 15 minutes a month of call. But I learned something also. This is another prison story that sticks in my mind. You know, the first night I went to federal prison, my mother was sick and I was calling her almost daily. So when I went there, I promised her that I'm gonna call her to check up on her because she was sick. But when I went to federal prison, they told me, you get only 15 minutes a month, 1 month from now. So I pleaded with the associate warden, is that my mother is sick, just give me 15 minutes and then I'll wait 1 month. So she promised to give it to me the following day. But the following day was a weekend, so she wasn't there. And I asked for my phone call, they denied it to me. And there, you know, this is an all solitary unit. I have all Muslims there, a lot of Muslims there. So they started banging on the doors, making so much noise. And I understood the beauty of solidarity right there. Of course, if you are going to be a disruptor, you will be punished. So they came with the video cameras trying to show that I'm a disruptor. And I was sitting there and my brothers were doing everything, all the noise in the world, until eventually they had to call her at home and give me my phone call. So I learned that night how important solidarity is and how it works and how it brings results.
I mean, Dr. Sami, to be honest with you, we could speak for such a long time. I think we've only just scratched the surface, and I know that we're closing towards time, but it's Ramadan, and you spent was it 12 Ramadans in prison?
No. I spent 6 Ramadans in prison. 6 Ramadans in prison. And 6 Ramadan
in house arrest.
In house arrest. You know what's interesting also is that I went through 3 phases. Now, I was thinking about this just today. Every time I went from phase 1 to phase 2, it was always in Ramadan. 2008, that's when I got out on house arrest. 2013, that's when they relaxed my house arrest. And 2014, Ramadan, also first day of Ramadan, that's when they dismissed the case.
So my last question to you is then definitely going to be about something that's very, some people find it odd, but it's close to my heart, and that is spending Ramadan alone, completely alone, isolated. Tell me in your words, how you spent any 1 year of Ramadan alone, and was it, as some people might think, a time of great sadness, or was it a great time of you building your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or was it both?
Well, it's very difficult for people to understand unless they experienced it. You know, the moment I went to prison, I stayed on my tahajjud on Taraweeh every single day in prison, the whole time. So to me, it was like every day was Ramadan. I also maintained of course, with hunger strike, you don't eat anything. It's worse than Ramadan in that respect. But also after that, I always would fast Mondays and Thursdays and the 3 days in between. So during the year, you fast about 130, 140 days. So it's like Ramadan becomes just another occasion by which you increase your spirituality. I mean, I was on a different spiritual plane. When you go through this experience, especially if you are alone or with someone that you're praying with, it's a completely different experience. I can tell you one story though. That's one day I went from prison to another prison when they were taking me from my first case to the second case. And in between, we went to Oklahoma. That's where they have most of the transfer happens in Oklahoma prison, because it's actually an airport strip.
And this is so far away from the family now, Florida and Oklahoma.
Wait. I mean,
thousands
of miles. So I was taken there, a plane with 150 people. And when we landed, they put me on one line and all 149 another line. So, after strip search and all kinds of shenanigans, as if I was coming from outside and I was from another prison, for God's sake. They took me, it was also the first day of Ramadan. So I was fasting and they put me on solitary. Everybody else was on the ground. I was the only person. And then I never faced this case before, where you are the only one in solitary. Sometimes you may have few others that you can shout through the glass or do something or ask them, but this was completely alone in a room that was windowless. And that has nothing, because I don't have any property. I don't have a Quran. I don't have blanket. I don't have pillow. I don't have anything. And this is Ramadan. And for 3 days, you're sitting there. All what you're doing is trying to obviously read the Quran that you know and go over it. You have no idea what time it is, no idea whatsoever. There's no indication whether, it's, you guess, it's only guessing. Twice a day, somebody's gonna come, open the slot. It's like dog, thing. They throw the tray, 15 minutes later, they come and collect. They don't even see their face for 3 continuous days. It is during these times where you can actually think about the most important things in life. And you make decisions that, that either you accept it or you become totally depressed and alienated and totally lose control and even lose sanity. It's like putting you in a bathroom in your own house. Just think you're in a bathroom. People now complain about, being locked down, and they have in houses and they can go outside and talk over the phone and the internet and Zoom and this and that. But here we're talking about being in a room that is no more than 50 square feet, 3 continuous days with nothing except, trying to stay, and during Ramadan, try to stay sane and with no communication with anybody. So these are days, but they make you stronger.
I've done so many talks in universities around this country, and one of the things that I've said repeatedly, because when people ask what's it like to be in a cell, I say, imagine the smallest room in your house, which is probably the bathroom or the toilet, and then imagine being locked in there for 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years. Yeah. That's what it's like. You can't imagine it. You couldn't put yourself in the bathroom for 2 hours, let alone 1. So it's amazing, as I said, that you and I have similar experiences, though we're in different places. And I know many other people from other parts of the world had similar experiences. Yeah. The Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam famously said, "Rabbi as-sijnu ahabbu ilayya mimma yad'unani ilayh." That's one of the reasons why you remained in prison, because prison was more, you were more prepared to go to prison than to give up your fight for justice. And alhamdulillah, it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. I hope that we continue to have these conversations as time continues, and that you continue your relationship with Cage, and we continue it with the Coalition for Civil Freedom Society. Jazakumullah khair.
Questions in the Q&A asking about the dreams that you saw in prison. There is a great deal of interest in this one subject, so I'm afraid you're not going to be able to avoid it. So if you could please share some of your dream stories with us, it would be very much appreciated.
Well, I'll give you 2.
Okay.
And the fourth I never told anybody, so because it hasn't happened yet, so I'm not going to share it with anybody. But I'll give you 2 of the 3. The first one actually happened in February 2005. We're a few months away from the trial, and I thought my lawyers were not doing a good job. They were not defending this. We haven't even selected a single witness. There were so many phone calls that they should translate. They haven't been translated to respond. I did not quite understood the way this case is going to be tried. Of course, my lawyer was very competent. 2 of my lawyers, great lawyers. Bill Moffitt, who passed away, and Linda Moreno, they had a different way of trying the case. And I'm saying, I'm thinking, at one point he said, "How many witnesses do you have?" So, I already prepared. I said 275. It was crazy because I thought they were looking for the truth and they weren't. He said, "This is not how these things are tried." So I was in a constant fight with them, and I wasn't pleased with the way they were preparing for the case. And because of this, I was pretty depressed. I was trying to translate myself and do all kinds of things. And, at the time, they put me in a women section of the prison because they didn't want me to talk to any people, even through the pipes. So I was totally isolated, because it's in a women section. So all the cells around me were empty. So I'm in a prison inside the unit, inside the whole wing that it's totally empty. I'm the only person, maybe 60 cells or something. And usually at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm diabetic, so they come and check my diabetes. So I was sleeping and obviously in the dream, it looks like reality. So 3 o'clock in the morning, they come and they check your diabetes. So in the dream, I'm seeing this, they're bringing this cart with the medical thing. And usually they will turn on the lights and then they open the door. So I'm hearing this coming and waiting for them to turn on the lights, but they open the door and there are no lights. So I open my eyes again in the dream and I see this person, not the nurse, with a huge rock in their hand. They're coming to crush my head. And of course you think it's reality and you're about to die. So you have one or two reactions, that what came to my mind. Either I will stand up and try to wrestle with that person, defend myself, or I would just accept my fate and pray. And then whatever happens, happens. And it's only 3 steps behind, between me and that person. And during these times, I remember a very long dua, actually, prayer. I don't have time to say it. So I take a small part from it and I say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, A'udhu billahi mimma akhafu wa ahdar. That God is great, God is great, God is great. I seek refuge from bad things to happen. So this person is coming now and I see I hear the footsteps. I hear the breathing, and they're right there and on the top of my head, about to crush my head with that rock. And I continue my prayer, and suddenly the breathing stops. I hear nobody. I open my eyes, and that person is gone with the door open, lights out. That's when I wake up, and I see exactly the same thing, but this time with the door shut. So I woke up, trying to make sense of what that meant. And I was guided to the fact that what the message I was getting is that do not fight, just pray. So from that moment on, I decided not to fight my lawyers. Let them defend the case the way they see it, just pray. So I concentrated on just praying, really every day. And my wife, God bless her, she gave me a book of prayers, which was very, very, very helpful, because it's all kinds of prayers, including the prayers when you're in prison. And there was actually, I remember this special prayer that you have to say it, but it says that you have to say it continuously without any interruption. And to say it actually takes about 4.5 hours. And I always, I kept delaying it because I don't have 4.5 hours where I'm not interrupted. There will always be a guard someplace. So to do this, really, you have to time it 11 o'clock when they no longer come until the medical card comes at 3:30. So these are the only 4.5 hours that I could. So I kept delaying it until one day during my trial, I said, I have to do it tonight. There's no other way. And I did, I finished it, alhamdulillah. And that prayer actually promised that freedom would come. The other dream I had was I remember the date, was November 11th, 2005, 2 days before the case went to the jury. And in that, I recited that dream actually to a friend of mine who was a pastor, who would usually come and visit with me every Tuesday. That's one of the other things with our case, is that we have a lot of non-Muslim friends and really made a difference in our case. So he came, usually would come with my wife, and I told him that dream, which I saw the following day. And it was 2 days before actually it went to the jury. And that dream, I saw myself in the courtroom, stripped of my clothes, except for my undershirt and underpants, with the prayer rug, to cover me. And then the judge is reciting the verdicts, and he's saying the verdicts of my co-defendants, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, and continuing saying not guilty. And he's refusing to say what verdict I got. So I started asking my lawyer, why is he not saying anything about me? She said, wait. During the trial, I should say that there were 12 jurors and 6 alternates. And I was communicating with them through my eyes all the time, trying to gauge them, except that one person who would never look at me. Whenever I look at him, he would look the other day. I could never read him. He came to my dream and he whispered in my ears, he's saying, "You're innocent too, you're innocent too." So I start shouting in the courtroom, "I'm innocent, I'm innocent." And then suddenly everybody is out the courtroom and I'm trapped. I couldn't get out, even though I was found innocent. And then I woke up and I told him, this is what I had. Now and I saw who was the jury person who was leading. So subhanAllah, this about 3 weeks later, one day before the verdict was said, you know, it was announced on December 6th. On December 5th, I'm called, and usually we go, you know, in a cell behind the courtroom. We went there and my lawyer said, the jury has a problem. I said, what is the problem? She said that they cannot agree on some charges. I said, great. And she said, we're trying to argue to have a mistrial. I said, why? It's going in our favor. I said, no, we cannot. I said, it's going in our favor. She said, how do you know this? I said, I saw it in my dream. She said, no, we argued that. That's too late. I said, why do you do this without consulting me? She said, don't worry. The government took the position you want, and the judge granted to them. I said, so what's going to happen now? He said he's going to bring the jury and tell them to keep deliberating. So indeed, he came, and he did think something I thought was unethical, because he asked for the partial verdict. And he read, without us knowing, 78 not guilty. There were a few other charges that they were still deliberating on. So at that moment, I told my co-defendants, you know, Hassan, congratulations. Samih, congratulations. You've been declared not guilty. I said, how do you know? I said, I saw this. SubhanAllah, the following day, when the judge do this, he stopped the deliberation of the other charges, and then he started announcing not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, 78 times. And you know, exactly my two co-defendants who I saw were out. I told them at the time that they were actually found not guilty. And of course, when I was trapped in the courtroom, everybody got out except me. And that's what happened to me. I was under house arrest for another, you know, this was 2005, and I got out in 2015. That's 10 years waiting for this moment when you get out of that courtroom, get out of that system. So subhanAllah, it was another indication of, you know, of something that I saw. And you know, I told my lawyer, Linda, at the time, do you know who the fourth person is? Because she was hoping that this woman, African-American middle-aged woman, that she, you know, she wanted her to be leading. And that's who I saw. And in 2015, I met that juror who came and whispered in my ears. And I said, Ron, what happened? Because, you know, I asked to go back, as I said, you know, I gave that khutbah in that masjid 2 weeks before I came to Turkey. So I asked him, what happened in the jury room? He said, we went to the jury room, and I had next to me one of the jury members. He was a young African-American lady. And that's, by the way, that's another miracle, because the judge had 500 people to choose from, because he didn't want to have you know, any accusation that he was biased, because the name recognition of my case was about 97%. So it was very difficult to get impartial jury. Out of the 500 people that he called in were 5 African-Americans, and 3 of them ended in my 12-member jury. Anyway, so he had her next to him, and she asked him, how do you feel about the case? So he told her, I don't think they did anything wrong. He said, what about you? She said, I don't think they did anything wrong either. And then she tells him, if you don't break, I won't break. And this person who came in my dream was the person defending me every single day, he was telling me. And he said, I'm sorry we couldn't get all the charges, you know, because they weren't fine. They were 10-2 in our favor, some of the charges, and the others were total acquittals. So that person, he's the one who actually came to my dream. And I said, who was the 4th person? I was interested in that, because I told him I saw this lady to be the 4th person. Was it her? He said, yes, it was. How do you know? I said, I don't know. I'm just guessing. And I said, how did that happen? He said, very simply, she went to the bathroom. She was the last person to enter the jury room, and said, because you were the last person, you're going to be our 4th. And I saw that 2 days before it actually happened.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. I mean, we've got so many questions, SubhanAllah. I'm going to try and see if we can get through as many of them possible. But, you know, Sister Amna, she asked, what kept you going in the most difficult times? I think that's an important question.
2 things. Wallahi, 2 things. Yani. Of course, there are many small things here and there. But one, when I say faith, it's a cliche, but it's not just cliche, because you have to believe in something bigger. You have to believe in something bigger and to know that the system, the people who are trying to prosecute you and to try to break you and to try to crush you, that's what they want. And you say, I'm not going to give them that moment. I'm not going to let them rejoice. You know, it was a constant battle every single day, and you have to maintain your cool and your patience. They want to break you down. That's what they try to do. That's what the system tried to do. So they are willing to do whatever it takes to break you down, and you're fighting back by maintaining your sanity, your spirituality, your faith. And second is family. I mean, it's pure and simple. My family was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. You know, my wife, she never missed a visit. Just imagine. And sometimes she would go 75 miles and would be denied that visit, and she would still come the following day and the following day and the following day. You know, my children, you know, I remember on one of my hunger strikes, they kept taking me from prison to prison. So I go to this prison way in the remote area, and they never even heard about hunger strike. They didn't even know how to deal with the hunger strike. So I went there, I said, I'm on a hunger strike. They wrote in the report, suicide watch. The moment they said suicide watch, they stripped me of all my clothes. They gave me something called turtle suit, something very strange. You know, it's like you're a turtle. It doesn't even cover your knees. They took my glasses, they took everything away, and I couldn't even see. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't, you know, make wudu or anything. And they put me on an isolated cell. So one of the people who were cleaning inmates was a Muslim. So I called on him and I said, do me a favor. I dictated to him a press release. I said, give it to my son. So he called my son, gave him the press release. And the second day, the press release went viral, thousands of calls to the prison. They didn't know what hit them. So the next day, I have the prison warden, the majors, you know, the associate, everybody came to my cell asking, who are you? What's going on here? And I told them, I'm not going to even speak to you. If you bring you my clothes and my glasses, I cannot even see you. So they had to actually go and get me my clothes. And why did that happen? Because of that commitment of people on the outside that they took that message. And because the switch of that prison, they couldn't work anymore because of the amount of questions and phone calls that were coming to them, that they make them unfunctional. So this is very important. And they were there every single day in the trial. They were writing, they were calling, they were traveling, they were fundraising. I mean, they did tremendous amount of job, but also as many other people, including so many friends, Muslim and non-Muslim, who were part of this. And we could not have done it without that support, without help, without the love we got. And I want to thank everybody. Take this opportunity, actually, if this reaches those people who were with us in that fight, I want to thank every and each one of them for what they've done. I think there is a documentary by a Norwegian film, and it shows some of these people whom I'm very grateful to call my friends.
I mean, subhanAllah, it's so amazing to hear you speak about that network that you have. Speaking about networks, we obviously have a lot of people in the US who are following this presentation, this interview. We've got people in the UK, of course. We have people from other parts of the world. Obviously, Brother Musa, who recited the Quran, was joining us from Belgium. But all the way on the other side of the world, we have Sister Randa Abdul Fattah from Australia, who's joined us as well today, mashallah. She's actually asking a question, alhamdulillah. And, obviously, we know Sister Randa very well. She's an amazing advocate for Muslims in Australia. She's very, very supportive of all of our causes. So she asked, when it comes to Muslims in the West mobilizing against state power, making connections between settler colonialism and race, understanding Islamophobia as systemic, not just as personal prejudice, fighting the war on terror, etc., do you think the main problem is apathy, ignorance, or fear?
Very nice. Very, very good question. The reason I smile is apathy or ignorance. You say, I don't know and I don't care. So it's both, sister. A lot of it, what's happening in the fear is one factor, ignorance is another factor, apathy is another factor. And that means that our job is multiplied. We need to start informing people, reminding them of what the important things in life are, and that everybody's freedom is at stake. It's not just those people on the outside or those people who are active, who are targeted. We've seen the damage that is taking place throughout the different communities. We saw people who are not considered even activists being targeted simply because their name is Muhammad or Ahmed or Khan or something, that they become immediate targets because there is a systematic work that's made the Muslim community as suspects. Our youth are being destroyed. Our generations of youth now are feeling that they have been stripped of their agency, of being of their identity, and you cannot do that with a community that is empowered. The whole point, the whole objective is political. It's how to disempower the Muslim community so that they cannot fight. They can be nice individuals, nice professors or nice professionals or successful business people and all that. But as a community to be empowered, where they could start asking for certain demands and certain policies that are going to affect a large number of Muslims that some other interest groups find this to be threatening, that is what is being fought. So to do this, we need to educate our community and tell them that they need to rise up to the occasion. They need to start building institutions. You mentioned Brother Hassan Shibli, who's doing a wonderful job in Florida. Florida now is becoming, even though this case was in Florida, it's becoming one of the model, it's becoming one of the model cities of how Muslims could be empowered. The mosque that we established today is one of the biggest mosques across the United States. The school that we started with 22 children, 3 of them were my kids. Today is one of the biggest schools across the United States. That would not have happened without that commitment and dedication. Thousands of meals have been given and medical supplies and others during this pandemic from that mosque. Who at one day they would call it jihad mosque and terrorism and this and that. And today every politician is clamoring to see how they can get the support and the endorsement of this mosque.
Based on your experience, what is the #1 need for our community? What do we need to do to be successful in the face of these government intimidation tactics? But also, what is the number one need from our community too? So when others face similar situations. So those 2 needs, please.
The need for the community and the other is?
From our community. So when people are facing similar situations, what is the need from the community in those situations?
If they are faced. Well, these are very good questions. When we talk about what we need to do and be prepared for, we have to understand the environment we live in. We have to have the strength in the community and most importantly in the leadership to understand how they can take the power of the community and utilize it for the benefit of everybody, not for the benefit of the few. And that means that they have to have deep understanding first of their faith and second of the environment and the country and the laws that they're living in. We're doing absolutely nothing against the laws. People who live in the West, who live in these communities, have already decided that these are the communities they're going to live in and they're going to die in, meaning that they want them to be peaceful. They want them to be the best communities that they can be. They are living in them. They are having their children. They are growing them. So they need that commitment. And then you need to establish the relationship outside the community. And I think this is one of the greatest things we were able to accomplish, which unfortunately other communities, when they were hit with this tsunami of cases, that they probably didn't have or didn't anticipate. But in our case, we really had very good relationship with many churches and civil rights organizations inside Tampa, Florida, and others. When we were hit with secret evidence, maybe God sent us that so we get prepared for the bigger one that was coming. I remember, when the NAACP, the largest civil Black African-American organization across the country, when I wanted them to get into the secret evidence case, they said, we're sympathized, but we don't know anything about it. And I said, how can I do anything? He said, come and attend our conference. So I went there and attended their annual conference. I was the only I'm sure I was the only Muslim, and probably from outside the African American community, but also maybe very few non-African Americans were there. And I put a resolution down. I said we need to condemn secret evidence. It was voted on overwhelmingly, and the second day it was in the papers. So it was very simple act for me to join that organization, attend their conference to get a resolution out. And then with the ACLU, I was asking them, the board, the Florida board, to take up this issue of secret evidence and do something with it. And every time they would say, we haven't got to it. They were not very enthusiastic, at least the national was, but the local wasn't. So I said, when is your next election? They said, actually, it's next month. So I went, I registered, and I stood for election, and there was no actually candidate. So I became a board member. Then I dictated on that agenda every single time that they have to talk about secret evidence, they have to do something about secret evidence, they have to put some resources behind secret evidence. So what I'm trying to tell you here is they need to get engaged with the community at large. We joined as a mosque another 19 churches. It's called Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality. And I got to know many of my friends, pastors and bishops and clergy people and lay people and all kinds of relationships we built. And they had so much respect for us as a community because we get engaged not just on, this organization doesn't talk about religion. They acknowledge everybody's faith, but we start talking about social justice issues. And in that experience, because they respected us so much, they always start with a prayer and end with the prayer. We were one mosque with 19 churches, but they will always respect us enough to either they start with the Muslim prayer or they end with a Muslim prayer. And with this organization, we were able to actually make it into a national issue. Secret evidence was from a local issue into a national issue. And there's so much talk about this, but the point here is get engaged. When the trial was going on, these people who were going to the streets, raising signs and talking about our innocence while the Muslim community was being intimidated by law enforcement agencies and the FBI. It was these people, when the jurors would come out of the courthouse, they will see them and they said, these are not from his community. The government must be hiding something. Why are these people out there? And they look like us. This is what we need to do. We need to engage with our community at large and be in, we got involved in educational issues, in medical issues, in jobless issues, in drugs and others, because these are the cases that they cared about. And then we were able to bring them to care about secret evidence. It was a mutual thing. I would go and attend them. I would go with them to Texas to find out what is the best reading program for young African-American children. Then they would come with me to DC to discuss secret evidence. That's exactly how it happened. We need to get involved with these organizations, and then we can get them to be involved in our cases.
Is there a favorite quote that inspires you? I'd like that to be your last word, and then I'll give my last words, inshallah.
Well, there isn't one. There are many. So that's why it's very difficult to pick one out of many. But when I was in prison, I wrote a book of poetry in 2004. It was published, and you'll probably find it on an old website. Perhaps as many as 80 or something like that, poems. And many of them go to themes. And when you are in prison, one of the surahs that you keep really reading and rereading and try to become your solace in prison is the story of Yusuf. So my book of poetry is called Conspiracy Against Joseph, because it likens the experience he had to go through with his with things that happened to him when he was deprived of his freedom and of course of the love of his parents and so on and so forth, and how he became triumphant at the end with the patience. So all the quotes that that really sustain me have to do with patience, but particularly the story of Sayyidina Yusuf. And always with that comes at the end, you will find maybe mentioned at least 5 times in the surah, the word muhsinin or ihsan, which is the highest level that a person can reach, faith, Islam, Iman, ihsan. So the point of ihsan is that even those, wallahi, I never, despite the pain that I had to suffer, and especially when you see your family suffering, I didn't have this hatred that people would typically have against those who hurt them. I don't know why. and I said that when I left. But again, there are many quotes, most of them from the Quran, from the Hadith, that deal with patience. I do have a particular affinity, about sabr, because I think this is what sustains a person and the true nature of faith.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Sami. Inshallah, that's a brilliant point to end on, to round up on. Inna Allah ma'as sabirin. Allah is with those who are patient. What better patience was there than that of Yusuf alayhi salam, who through his incarceration, and one that every prisoner that I've ever come across, when we used to read the surah of Yusuf alayhi salam, I used to break down in tears all the way through. Break down in tears, not because he's thrown in prison. That's not the part that brought me to tears. The part that brought me to tears is that when his brothers meet him and they say, "Innaka anta Yusuf," are you Yusuf? And he responds by saying, "La tathriba alaykum yawm." There is no vengeance upon you this day. His abusers and his oppressors never became his teachers. His teacher was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His teacher was Yaqub alayhi salam. His teacher was the deen that he was upon. And the same for us, the same you've seen from the story of Dr. Sami Arian, is that there's no bitterness, there's no seeking vengeance. La tathrib alaykum al-yawm. What I'm seeking is justice and the defense of other people. And if there's one way to sum up this, one way to sum up the work of CAGE, one way to sum up the work of CCF, that is that we seek justice. We aren't seeking more, we aren't seeking less. La tadhlimun wa la tudhlamun. Do not oppress and do not be oppressed. And these are the words Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has impressed upon us as Muslims, as human beings, as those who care for all of mankind, as we believe that the best of mankind, the Prophet ﷺ said, are those who are beneficial to mankind. And what greater benefit could there be than to defend a person when they're then being oppressed? As the Prophet ﷺ said, and Dr. Sami referred to, that the best struggle, the best jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to speak a word against against a tyrant. And that tyrant can indeed be a tyrannical system, an oppressive system, of which there are many, sadly a lot of them in the Muslim world. Many of those have been co-opted by various administrations in the US. And that is where we stand constantly fighting, not fearing the blame of any blamer, as long as we are supported, received Allah's support from the heavens and your support from the earth, from your pockets, from your du'as, and from your physical support to offer it, to volunteer for us, to point us in the right directions, to straighten us when we're wrong. But Jazakumullah khair. I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts all of your deeds in these last days of Ramadan. He forgives your sins. He brings us close together. He removes oppression, and he makes the world into a better place where we can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he's asked us to.